Welcome, gentle listeners, to tonight's somnolent journey. We venture now into the herbaceous realms of medieval mind-alteration, a world where intoxication was both art and accident. Medieval folk indeed partook, but their experiences were far more curious and inventive than our modern indulgences might suggest. Before we delve deeper, I invite you to support this slumberous chronicle with a gentle tap on the like button and perhaps a subscription, but only if my historical lullabies truly please you. I'm always curious, where in the world are you listening from, and at what hour? The global tapestry of listeners continues to fascinate me. Now, adjust your lighting to a soft glow, perhaps activate a fan for that perfect background whisper, and let us drift together into centuries past. One might erroneously envision the Middle Ages as merely a somber procession of mandrake, pestilence, and root vegetables beneath layers of woolen garments and melancholy. Yet beneath this austere veneer lived people ordinary, imperfect, experimental souls who would occasionally encounter an unusual root and ponder, what if I steep this in mulled wine? And truly, who could fault them? And entertainment consisted largely of watching semi-literate nobility attempt reading or observing neighbors dance until they collapsed from fungal poisoning. If someone offered you a fungus promising temporary respite from feudal obligations, would you not be tempted? Contrary to contemporary belief, the practice of consuming substances to expand consciousness, alleviate suffering, or simply render existence marginally more tolerable was not uncommon indeed. It was woven into the cultural fabric. They simply didn't call it getting high. There were no medieval equivalents of modern cannabis enthusiasts giggling behind hay bales. Instead, such experiences were described as visionary states, divine inspiration, pain remediation, or, in less fortunate instances, simply uh-oh. Physicians prescribed herbs, monastics cultivated them, alleged witches applied them, and virtually everyone encountered these substances through medicine, ritual, or the inadvertent consumption of moldy grain products. Medieval intoxicants extended well beyond mere ale, though that certainly sufficed for many. Their pharmacopeia included roots said to scream when harvested, flowers that distorted vision, seeds inducing prophetic slumber, and unguents that convinced users they were soaring unclothed through night skies alongside infernal banquet staff. Intoxication rarely served purely recreational purposes. It was medicinal, spiritual, or occasionally the result of poor judgment combined with hunger. Depending on one's station, these substances might be administered by a barber surgeon, a religious sister, or an unshod peasant called Wolf, who claimed tutelage from an exceptionally sagacious squirrel. In medieval Europe, acquiring mind-altering substances required neither clandestine transactions nor exclusive establishments. One needed merely a garden, rudimentary grinding implements, and a casual approach to dosage. Nature served as the apothecary, often with unpredictable benevolence. The continent abounded with flora, roots, fungi, and resins, capable of either relieving headaches or inducing the delusion of matrimony with an oak. The distinction between medicine and mystical experience was, shall we say, interpreted with considerable artistic license. Physicians, monastics, midwives, and itinerant herbalists all engaged in botanical practices with varying degrees of expertise and zeal. For those seeking sedation, calming of nerves, or visions of divinity in their pottage, options abounded. Consider henbane, nature's equivalent of a hazardous game of chance. When properly prepared, it alleviated pain and induced sleep. When improperly prepared, it introduced entirely novel complications, including convulsions and an irrepressible urge to discard one's footwear while fleeing through woodlands, vocalizing with considerable volume. Or contemplate mandrake, the anthropomorphic root. Legend maintained it emitted a lethal scream when unearthed, a sound so deadly it could terminate human life instantly. This hardly deterred harvesting, typically accomplished by securing the plant to a canine and observing from a considerable distance. Consumption could induce unconsciousness, visions, and occasionally prophetic dreams. On less fortunate days, one's need for botanical remedies would be permanently concluded. Then there was belladonna, or deadly nightshade, a name that unequivocally suggests caution. It served to dilate pupils for cosmetic enhancement, but also treated pain, induced hallucinations, and occasionally mortality. Medieval wellness practices embraced considerable risk. These herbs were commonly combined into infusions, tinctures, oils, or the notorious flying ointments we shall address presently. Their application wasn't always voluntary. Sometimes they featured in religious ceremonies, surgical procedures, or were administered by well-intentioned apothecaries who believed additional root material could cause no harm. Evidence suggests otherwise. Henbane, the medieval equivalent of reckless curiosity, known scientifically as hyoscyamus niger, and colloquially as the substance that convinced Uncle Bernard of his transformation into waterfowl. Henbane was a cornerstone of unofficial medieval pharmacy throughout Europe for centuries. Henbane transcended mere botanical classification. It represented a particular state of being. Monastics documented its properties in herbals. Physicians employed it for pain management. Alleged witches utilized it for hallucinatory broomstick journeys, and the peasantry. They primarily hoped to avoid its accidental consumption. What precisely did henbane do? That depended on circumstance. In modest quantities, it functioned as a sedative, alleviating dental pain, addressing insomnia, and rendering childbirth marginally less traumatic. Essentially, the medieval equivalent of take two and attempt stoicism. In larger quantities, or at inopportune moments, henbane induced delirium, hallucinations, agitation, and occasionally earnest dialogue with root vegetables mistaken for deceased relatives. The plant contains scopolamine and hyoscyamine compounds that interfere with neural transmission. In non-technical terms, the medieval brain rapidly became disoriented. Visual distortion, confusion, xerostomia, extreme thirst, and spontaneous interpretive movement were common effects. Henbane was smoked, brewed, or combined with fat and applied dermalia, popular method for those who preferred non-linear consciousness. Was it legal? Technically, yes. Regulated substances were not yet conceptualized. However, it provoked controversy, particularly within ecclesiastical circles. Anything altering perception aroused suspicion. Visions were expected to originate from sanctified sources, not shrubbery. Nevertheless, henbane maintained popularity among healers, mystics, and the particularly desperate. It even featured in beer formulations before prohibition in favor of less hazardous additions like hops. Few medieval plants inspired the fear, reverence, and profound misunderstanding of mandrake root, so potent and eerily anthropomorphic that it generated a curious amalgamation of botanical science, folklore, and abject terror. Scientifically designated Mandragora officinarum, mandrake, was associated with somnolence, hallucinations, fertility, and the substantial likelihood of either mystical revelation or regaining consciousness in a ditch alongside a bewildered goat. Either outcome was possible. Medieval herbalists believed this human-shaped root possessed powerful magical and medicinal properties. It functioned as sedative, anesthetic, aphrodisiac, and according to some accounts, conduit to prophetic dreams. One could simmer it in wine to alleviate pain or inhale its vapors, and immediately question one's life decisions. The mandrake's primary notoriety, however, stemmed from its reputed vocalization when uprooted. Yes, screaming specifically, the "do not remove me from the soil, lest you perish" from the auditory experience variety. Medieval texts cautioned that merely hearing the mandrake's cry could prove fatal, naturally leading to creative harvesting methodologies. The most renowned involved tethering the root to a dog, retreating, and allowing the animal to extract it. Ecclesiastical authorities regarded mandrakes with suspicion. Anything inducing visions outside official religious channels was considered adjacent to witchcraft. Nevertheless, monastics recorded mandrake recipes with suspiciously detailed instructions. When properly utilized, mandrake could mitigate surgical pain, address insomnia, and generate vivid dreams. Improper usage resulted in emesis, unconsciousness, or familial arrangements for exorcism, because one perceived one's soup to be communicative. Imagine being a medieval noblewoman seeking attention at a feast. Options included wearing fine linen, adorning one's hair with floral arrangements, or for the truly committed applying literal poison to one's eyes. Enter belladonna, scientifically known as atropa belladonna, or, more candidly, deadly nightshade. The name evokes a formidable adversary in medieval fantasy, the botanical equivalent of a seductive but unstable former paramour. The term belladonna translates to beautiful lady, as applying extract to the eye's dilated pupils. Enlarged eyes were considered attractive, enigmatic, and occasionally suggesting sanctity. Disadvantages included blurred vision, photosensitivity, and unintentional hallucinations. But aesthetic standards have rarely prioritized comfort. Beyond cosmetic applications, belladonna offered additional capabilities. It served as analgesic, soporific, and occasionally as veridical serum, though the truth elicited often resembled statements like "the ceiling exudes Latin prayers." The plant contains atropine and scopolamine, both affecting the nervous system in ways ranging from mild disorientation to inquiring why architectural elements appear to undulate. It commonly featured in potions, flying ointments, and questionable medical protocols, requiring patient anesthesia before amputation. Belladonna, simulating death-like sleep for theatrical or suspicious purposes. Belladonna, inadvertently encountering saints and potentially Satan during dreams. The pattern becomes evident. Despite its toxicity, belladonna remained integral to medieval medical practice. Physicians employed it carefully or recklessly, depending on the week's plague severity, and it appears in herbals, recipes, and amorous charms throughout Europe. Before modern consumables arrived in discreet packaging with fruity flavoring, medieval populations demonstrated considerable ingenuity, though not with chocolate. Instead, they relied on ointments, balms, tinctures, and potions. To be clear, the term ointment rarely inspires confidence, particularly when ingredients include belladonna, adipose tissue from black felines, and ambiguous quantities of hemlock stirred widdershins during full moons. Welcome to medieval transdermal delivery systems, essentially. Applying suspicious paste to one's skin and hoping for favorable outcomes. These preparations weren't intended for casual weekend euphoria. Many were associated with rituals, folk medicine, and spiritual experiences. They could induce unconsciousness, ecstatic trances, or, if misused, convince users of reptilian transformation. Application was typically topical, which appears safer until one learns the preferred absorption sites involved mucous membranes. Yes, those particular membranes. Consider the infamous flying ointments associated with witchcraft. A remarkable combination of henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and porcine fat, often applied to discretion, suggests euphemism in intimate anatomical regions. The objective, tephoric sensation of flight. The result, a transcendent astral journeying or regaining consciousness in agricultural storage with dental deficiencies and amnesia regarding one's arrival. Beyond salves, medieval potions were commonly consumed in wine, broth, or liquids evoking regret. Apothecaries favored combining poppy extract with spiced wine, a mixture potent enough to anesthetize surgical patients or provide uninvited divine revelation. Let us not overlook elixirs sold by itinerant charlatans. These traveling pharmacists promised remedies for everything from romantic disappointment to bubonic plague, often using formulations capable of dissolving footwear. Were they effective? Perhaps. Or perhaps they merely induced forgetfulness regarding the original complaint. The enchantment of medieval consumables lay in their unpredictability. Would one sleep peacefully, commune with celestial beings, or howl at lunar bodies while pledging eternal fidelity to root vegetables? Experimentation provided the only answer. Behold the broomstick, that quintessential companion of the medieval witch, now relegated to children's tales and festive frore. Yet, in its time, this humble household implement harbored a scandalously intimate secret. The broomstick, dear listeners, served purposes far beyond mere sweeping. The connection between witches and their flying implements has surprising pharmacological foundations beyond the aforementioned mandrake. Historical chronicles, particularly those penned by suspicious ecclesiastical investigators, document the use of flying unguents, viscous, consciousness-altering bombs concocted from plants such as henbane, belladonna, and datura, botanical specimens about as benevolent as an inebriated hedgehog. Here lies the revelation. These potent mixtures were not intended for oral consumption. Why such restraint? Instead, application occurred dermally, specifically targeting mucous membranes. Yes, precisely those anatomical regions now springing to mind. Thus enters the broomstick, delicately described in certain texts as a staff consecrated for conveyance. The handle facilitated application of these substances to areas of heightened absorption, hardly suitable for polite discourse, yet remarkably efficacious. Within mere moments, those who partook reported ethereal sensations of nocturnal flight, attendance at diabolical gatherings, or simply hovering above their hamlet like a thoroughly bewildered celestial observer. These were, of course, hallucinatory experiences, but in an era where medicine, mysticism, and magical belief occupied the same conceptual chamber, few questioned such phenomena. Inquisitors and theological authorities documented these accounts meticulously, not from pharmacological curiosity, but because they interpreted flight as evidence of demonic congress. The irony remains that these visions stemmed from chemical compounds rather than supernatural pacts. But when has medieval jurisprudence ever required empirical substantiation? While European practitioners were applying hazardous substances to broomsticks and declaring it aerial transportation, a considerably more sophisticated approach to consciousness, alteration flourished southward and eastward in the luminous, metropolitan centers of the Islamic Golden Age. Enter hashish, the botanical solution derived from cannabis resin. Hashish enjoyed widespread utilization throughout Persia, Egypt, and the Levant. Unlike Europe's apply this suspicious substance and commune with infernal powers methodology, Islamic scholars, mystics, and physicians documented its effects with such precision that one suspects comprehensive personal investigation. Hashish consumption typically occurred orally, artfully blended with honey, aromatic spices, or complementary herbs, rendering it perhaps history's first palatable psychoactive confection, in stark contrast to medieval Europe's tradition of bitter infusions and concoctions reminiscent of malodorous footwear. Its purpose transcended mere recreation, though such applications certainly occurred. Hashish maintained particular association with Sufism, Islam's mystical tradition, wherein practitioners sought transcendent union with the divine. Hashish was believed to facilitate ego dissolution, mental clarity, and profound contemplative states, or, at minimum, inspire protracted philosophical contemplation of architectural surfaces. Indeed, numerous Sufi poets and philosophers described hashish with the same passionate intensity contemporary lyricists reserve for romantic disillusionment, employing profound emotion, metaphorical abstraction, and sufficient ambiguity to prompt concern for their psychological well-being. Naturally, universal approval remained elusive. Various Islamic rulers periodically attempted prohibition, fearing societal indolence, moral deterioration, or excessive levity during devotional practices. Yet, like most substance prohibitions throughout history, these efforts achieved approximately the success rate of instructing felines in the art of object manipulation. The fabled Hashishin, from whom we derive the term assassin, allegedly employed hashish before undertaking missions, presumably to achieve the appropriate psychological state for political elimination. This claim largely constitutes historical fabrication, yet exemplifies how cannabis derivatives have long been enveloped in both mystique and suspicion. Meanwhile, European understanding of cannabis utilization remained centuries distant, their approach limited to immediate combustion or denouncement as diabolical vegetation. When envisioning a medieval ecclesiastical edifice, one might conjure images of luminous stained glass, tremulous candlelight, solemn choral intonation, and that dense, otherworldly cloud of incense permeating the atmosphere like divine atmospheric manipulation. Yet, incense served purposes beyond mere sanctification. It harbored unexpected psychoactive potential. Consider the principal aromatic resins, frankincense and myrrh, both resinous substances imported from the Arabian Peninsula and East African regions, burned in sacred spaces, royal courts, and ceremonial contexts. These substances purportedly purified atmospheres, repelled malevolent spirits, and mitigated the prevalent aromas of unwashed wool and fermented fish. However, contemporary research reveals that combusted frankincense releases compounds, particularly insensyl acetate, capable of affecting the brain's limbic structures. In practical terms, sufficient exposure to such vapors could complement Gregorian chants in producing altered consciousness. Prolonged exposure to incense potentially induced mild sedative effects, especially when combined with nutritional abstinence, insufficient hydration, or profound ceremonial monotony. Reports of visionary experiences during extended services were not uncommon, and while often attributed to divine inspiration, one might reasonably suspect mild neurochemical alteration from resinous fumes. This phenomenon extended well beyond Christian contexts. Incense featured prominently in Islamic mosques, Jewish synagogues, Buddhist temples, and pre-Christian pagan observances. The practice transcended religious boundaries. Evidently, atmospheric enhancement appeals universally. Religious authorities insisted that incense elevated souls heavenward. Realistically, it may have simply softened perceptual boundaries sufficiently to render 5-hour homilies marginally more endurable. Consider it the medieval equivalent of ambient musical accompaniment and aromatic candles, albeit with more ecclesiastical Latin and considerably less relaxation. If medieval populations could rely on anything beyond taxation and intermittent pestilence, it was fermented beverages, beer, ale, mead, wine, cider, whatever nomenclature applied. Someone undoubtedly fermented it in wooden vessels behind their dwelling, while proclaiming its medicinal properties. In fairness, such claims held merit. Potable water presented significant hazards. Most natural sources suffered contamination or flowed downstream from livestock enclosures, rendering stream consumption equivalent to gastrointestinal gambling. Consequently, people gravitated toward fermented alternatives. Enter small beer, the medieval equivalent of modern sparkling water, albeit with a modest alcohol content and a charming lack of quality control. Brewed by village women who measured ingredients through generational wisdom rather than precise metrics. This low-alcohol beverage sustained daily life for both adults and children. Its purpose was not intoxication, but survival, providing essential hydration with just enough fermentation to render it safer than water and more pleasant than sobriety. The medieval drinking hierarchy extended beyond this humble staple, however. Those of greater means or leisure might indulge in robust ales, honeyed mead, or imported wines, often enhanced with herbs and spices for therapeutic benefit, flavor enrichment, or simple experimentation. Within monastery walls, brewing transcended mere production to become a sacred vocation. Monks meticulously refined recipes, documented fermentation processes, and conducted thorough quality assessments with notable devotion. The Benedictine order, in particular, elevated brewing to an art form worthy of divine appreciation. Beyond its spiritual dimensions, alcohol served as medieval pharmacology's universal solvent. Dental agony ale provided blessed numbness, melancholic disposition. Spiced wine offered temporary respite, dwelling in squalid conditions alongside multiple relatives and judgmental poultry. Mead delivered merciful oblivion. Medieval taverns functioned as primitive psychological sanctuaries, albeit considerably louder ones. Within these establishments, patrons celebrated milestones, processed grief, exchanged intelligence, and occasionally pioneered peculiar choreography without solicitation. Indeed, medieval intoxication often arrived not through deliberate pursuit, but through breakfast necessity. Consider now ergot, parasitic fungus infiltrating rye and other grains. To medieval observers, it appeared merely as darkened, slightly malformed kernels. To contemporary scientists, it represents a botanical saboteur containing compounds chemically related to lysergic acid diethylamide. Its effects manifest with medieval poetic justice. Convulsions, vivid hallucinations, burning sensations in extremities, and occasionally the disturbing perception that one's appendages have metamorphosed into arachnids. This fungal contaminant constituted the inadvertent psychedelic component in countless medieval meals. Centuries before psychedelic experimentation entered cultural consciousness, throughout Europe's colder, damper regions, particularly France and Germanic territories, populations regularly consumed ergot-contaminated rye bread from sheer necessity. Hunger invariably superseded mycological discernment, resulting in entire communities unwittingly consuming contaminated loaves, with consequences both spectacular and harrowing. Medical literature identifies two distinct manifestations of ergotism: the convulsive variant, characterized by muscular spasms, seizures, hallucinatory experiences, and unpredictable emotional outbursts, and the gangrenous form, where vascular constriction progressively eliminated circulation to extremities, causing necrosis, desiccation, and eventual autoamputation, a condition fundamentally incompatible with social gatherings. Regional outbreaks periodically produced extraordinary behavioral phenomena, including documented dancing plagues, where afflicted individuals engaged in involuntary, unceasing movement for days, occasionally until fatal exhaustion. Contemporary authorities attributed these manifestations to demonic influence, divine retribution, or moral deficiency, when in reality they likely represented mass poisoning through fungally enhanced bread products. In a historical irony worthy of appreciation, the Order of St. Anthony, which operated specialized hospices for afflicted individuals, successfully treated ergotism victims primarily by administering wheat-based nourishment instead of rye. Thus, the therapeutic intervention consisted essentially of alternative bread. Did medieval populations recognize this causal relationship? Rarely. To the typical medieval baker, bread quality existed in binary categories: satisfactory or supernaturally compromised, without consideration of alkaloid contamination. Their priorities centered on ecclesiastical standing rather than mycotoxicology. Contemporary scholars have even proposed ergot's involvement in later phenomena, such as the Salem witch trials, citing symptomatically consistent behaviors, including hallucinations, physical contortions, and pathological suspicion. While this theory remains contested, one historical certainty persists: medieval Europe experienced widespread psychedelic effects through contaminated grain consumption, entirely without awareness or intention. Beyond the familiar entheogenic mushrooms and pharmacologically active unguents lies a more obscure psychoactive substance: mad honey. In select regions of the medieval world, even apian products participated in consciousness alteration. This specialized honey, distinct from common varieties, originated in the mountainous Black Sea territories of Anatolia, present-day Turkey, where bees harvested nectar from rhododendron blossoms, aesthetically pleasing flowers harboring a chemical secret: granitoxins, naturally occurring compounds that interact adversely with mammalian neurological systems. The resulting substance produced remarkable physiological and psychological effects: vertigo, hallucinatory experiences, gastrointestinal distress, cardiac deceleration, and metaphysical insights, typically manifesting in precisely this sequence. Consumed judiciously, it induced mild euphoria. Ingested liberally, it transformed ordinary perception into a protracted surrealist performance featuring one's own facial features as principal characters. Mad honey transcended mere curiosity to achieve tactical significance. Historical accounts document deliberate honey-based biological warfare, where retreating populations strategically abandoned toxic honey for advancing armies. Unsuspecting soldiers, believing they had discovered valuable provisions, instead experienced incapacitating neurological effects, finding themselves prostrate and disoriented among woodland detritus, belatedly recognizing honey's potential for betrayal. Classical authors, including Xenophon and Strabo, documented these phenomena centuries earlier. Yet consumption practices continued throughout medieval periods. Indigenous populations developed sophisticated usage protocols. Minimal quantities applied to bread alleviated cephalic discomfort. Modest amounts added to wine facilitated transcendent experiences. Complete abstention preserved cognitive function and identity recollection through evening hours. Mad honey acquired recognition as both therapeutic agent and consciousness-altering substance, particularly within mystical traditions and folk medicine. Some consumers reported prophetic dream states, while others awakened clutching root vegetables they had mistakenly identified as family members. Outcomes varied considerably, and commercial distribution occurred without standardization. Enterprising merchants distributed this substance in ceramic containers, typically without dosage, recommendations consumer protection being understandably minimal in an era that embraced hematophagous annelids as sophisticated medical technology. Medieval society extended beyond ecclesiastical, aristocratic, and agrarian demographics. Certain individuals operated within society's liminal spaces as shamanic practitioners, herbalists, cunning folk, and other semi-recognized purveyors of healing and enchantment. Consider them medieval pharmacologists, operating without regulatory oversight and maintaining intimate botanical relationships. These practitioners served communities when conventional medicine offered only bloodletting for dental pathologies. Though lacking formal credentials, they possessed generational herbal knowledge, often acquired through practical apprenticeship rather than theoretical instruction. Regarding consciousness-altering substances, these individuals provided specialized expertise. They recognized which botanical specimens required pulverization, which roots benefited from vinous extraction, and precisely what quantity of specific herbs would produce angelic visions rather than premature celestial relocation. Whether clients sought pain management, divinatory experiences, neighborly retribution, or transcendent laundry experiences, these practitioners offered multiple remedial approaches. Many such specialists were women midwives, wise women, and healers who provided essential community services while generating apprehension among authority figures, not through stereotypical cauldron utilization, but through their independent expertise, operating outside institutional frameworks. Their pharmacopeia frequently included henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and opium derivatives. These substances underwent combination with wine, adipose matter, honey, or occasionally saliva without hyperbole, accompanied by protective incantations, before dispensation as remedies capable of either therapeutic benefit or inducing confessions to fictional transgressions. When adverse reactions occurred, perhaps hallucinations featuring airborne caprids or sudden arboreal matrimonial impulses, ablution shifted rapidly from pharmaceutical miscalculation to maleficent enchantment. Ecclesiastical and secular authorities maintained vigilant observation while experiencing nervous facial tics. Nevertheless, communities depended on these practitioners during pediatric febrile episodes, arthritic discomfort, or necessary communication with deceased relatives regarding concealed financial resources. These individuals constituted neither conventional physicians nor religious functionaries, but rather the original unregulated wellness consultants. After examining various preparations, concoctions, botanicals, unguents, aromatic substances, apian products, and questionable bread, one significant question emerges. How did medieval populations conceptualize consciousness alteration? Their perspective, profoundly ambivalent, simultaneously humorous and contradictory. For healing practitioners and herbalists, mind-altering substances represented practical instruments. Substances that mitigated pain, moderated psychological distress, or marginally improved obstetrical experiences received pragmatic acceptance. This constituted medicine rather than misconduct. While patients might recite liturgical texts in reverse or perceive feline polyglotism, successful symptom reduction validated the approach. Simultaneously, spiritual practitioners, monastic communities, mystics, and those pursuing divine communication interpreted hallucinatory experiences not as pathological manifestations, but as revelatory encounters. Visionary states signified spiritual election rather than symptomatic disturbance. Direct perception of transcendent realities, accompanied by Latin vocalization, suggested rapid progression toward canonization, or minimally commemorative artistic representation. Intentionality proved crucial. Accidental intoxication generated minimal concern. Consciousness alteration for divine revelation remained acceptable. Similar states pursued for demonic intercourse constituted problematic behavior. Ecclesiastical institutions consequently classified certain substances and their users as suspicious or potentially heretical. Any practice associated with behavioral disinhibition, whether intoxication, trance states, or inconvenient truthfulness, attracted clerical scrutiny. Visionary experiences received divergent interpretation based on social position. Saintly figures experienced divine revelation. Peasants suffered demonic possession. Meanwhile, common populations maintained more pragmatic attitudes. Neighboring households might employ soporific preparations with secondary psychedelic properties. Communities utilized poppy-infused wine for pain management, hashish for anxiety reduction, and henbane infusions for managing difficult familial relationships. These substances occupied domestic pharmacology alongside aromatic bulbs and devotional practices, rather than exceptional or rebellious categories. Ultimately, the social reception of consciousness alteration depended on practitioner identity, substance selection, and discretion maintenance. Within medieval conceptual frameworks, altered consciousness occupied ambiguous categorization between miraculous and transgressive, therapeutic and heretical. In an era where demonic entities, canonized individuals, epidemic disease, and agricultural deprivation coexisted as routine experiences, occasional herbal escapism represented a thoroughly reasonable response. In the ancient world, the sea wasn't merely a barrier to be traversed, it was the pulsating lifeblood of empires. These azure highways carried not just grain and gold, but destiny itself. Those who mastered the waves commanded far more than water. They held the fate of entire civilizations in their salt-crusted hands. While land battles were shaped by hills and valleys, naval warfare was about something more profound: the control of movement, commerce, communication, and access. For maritime powers like Athens, Carthage, and Egypt, naval supremacy wasn't a luxury, it was survival itself. Cities without fleets lay vulnerable. their throats exposed to the blade of isolation, hunger, and inevitable siege. But those with naval might could strangle enemies from afar, shelter merchant vessels heavy with wealth, and deliver armies to enemy shores like thunderbolts from clear skies. Consider the Mediterranean, not called the Middle Sea by accident. This vast inland ocean embraced 3 continents and countless cultures in its azure arms. To rule, it meant to feel the pulse of everything from ancient Phoenician trading routes to the vital Roman grain lifelines. The sea offered abundance and catastrophe with equal indifference. This explains why ancient powers poured their treasure into naval infrastructure, with religious devotion harbors carved from reluctant coastlines, shipyards humming with industry, dry docks that cradled wooden behemoths, and navies that consumed resources like hungry gods. For Athens, the navy became more than military mighty, became identity itself. Themistocles' visionary transformation created a thalassocracia sea-born empire, whose wooden walls guarded precious grain from Egypt, extracted tribute from reluctant allies, and crushed Persian dreams amid the churning waters of Salamis. Carthage emerged as something differenta, naval colossus, born from merchant ambitions. Its dockyards represented engineering marvels unsurpassed in the ancient world, producing warships with an efficiency that bordered on the industrial. Yet, Carthaginian dominance transcended mere military hardware. It was sustained by generations of sailors who read the sea's moods like a familiar text, navigators who understood currents and winds as intimately as their own heartbeats. Egypt, blessed by geography at the convergence of the Nile and Red Sea, relied on naval power with equal necessity. Though its focus remained more riverine, Egyptian warships evolved into formidable sea-going vessels capable of confronting pirates and safeguarding precious cargoes. In each case, naval warfare wasn't a peripheral concern, it was the central arena where rivals collided, alliances shattered, and empires either blossomed or withered. Mastery of naval tactics, technological innovation, and geographical knowledge birthed legends. And when those proud fleets burned or vanished beneath the waves, the mighty toppled with them. The trireme stood as more than a vessel, it was a weapon incarnate, lethal in its elegance and devastating in its purpose. This marvel defined Mediterranean naval combat, and though many city-states constructed them, none wielded them with the deadly grace of Athenian crews. Armed with 3 ascending rows of oars and a bronze-tipped ram, the trireme represented the ancient equivalent of a precision missile, one powered not by fuel but by the synchronized heartbeats, straining muscles, and tactical brilliance of its crew. A typical trireme stretched 120 feet from stern to bow, yet measured a mere 18 feet across. This narrowness wasn't a compromise, but its greatest strength. The slender hull sliced through water with minimal resistance, while its shallow draft allowed it to operate in coastal shallows, perfect for lightning raids and tactical landings. The vessel's name, trireme, reveals its defining feature: 3 vertical tiers of oars working in perfect unison. These weren't just any rowers, but trained maritime athletes moving as one organism at speeds approaching 9 knots. In combat, the trireme's most feared weapon was its Rama bronze-sheathed prow, reinforced with oak, designed to rupture enemy hulls with catastrophic force. Yet ramming was an art form requiring perfect execution. Strike too directly, and your ship might become fatally lodged in the enemy vessel, or even capsize from the impact. The finest captains, particularly those commanding Athenian fleets, perfected maneuvers like the declysion, intricate dance of penetrating enemy formations, pivoting with precision, and striking vulnerable flanks with lethal results. Above the sweating rowers, the trireme carried a modest contingent of marines, typically 10 to 20, heavily armored hoplites, accompanied by a handful of archers. Their role was to board enemy ships or repel boarders in the chaos of close combat. Yet make no mistake, the trireme was never designed as a floating fortress. Its survival depended on agility rather than armor. A single tactical error meant transformation from predator to kindling in moments. What elevated the Athenian trireme fleet beyond mere vessels was the revolutionary social system that powered it. Funded through the Thyricon, a public naval treasury, Athens constructed and maintained hundreds of these wooden warriors. Citizens from every social stratum, even the poorest, served as rowers, creating a uniquely democratic dimension to naval warfare. When Athens triumphed over the Persian armada at Salamis in 480 BCE, it wasn't aristocratic privilege that secured victory, it was the collective might of common citizens pulling oars in perfect rhythm. Ancient naval combat shared little with later gunpowder confrontations. It more closely resembled high-velocity chess punctuated by moments of frenzied violence. The objective remained elegantly simple: disable or sink enemy vessels before suffering the same fate. The primary method, ramming the centerpiece of trireme naval tactics. Crews sought to pierce enemy hulls below the waterline using their vessel's bronze-tipped prow. A perfectly executed ram could send an enemy ship to the depths within minutes. Yet success demanded more than blind aggression. Timing, angle of approach, and crew coordination determined life or death. Too shallow an approach resulted in a glancing blow. To direct an impact risked embedding your ship in the enemy hull, transforming both vessels into vulnerable targets. To execute successful ramming attacks, fleets developed sophisticated maneuvers like the decaplus and periplus. The decaplus required a ship to dart through gaps in enemy formations before pivoting sharply to strike from behind. The periplus involved outflanking enemy lines to attack exposed sides. These weren't brute force tactics, but precision strikes dependent on rowers' perfect synchronization and commanders' tactical foresight. Yet naval battle remained unpredictable. Rams missed targets, vessels collided chaotically, and capricious winds shifted advantage in heartbeats. The Battle of Salamis, fought in confined straits, remains one of history's most consequential naval engagements. This victory didn't merely preserve Athens. It positioned the city-state as guardian and eventual master of the Aegean. Under the Delian League, Athens began collecting tribute from allied city-states, ostensibly for mutual defense. In practice, these resources often funded Athenian ambitions, from expanded shipbuilding programs to magnificent public architecture. The navy granted Athens unprecedented power to enforce loyalty, suppress rebellion, and project influence far beyond its modest territorial boundaries. Yet this wasn't solely a military transformation. The fleet democratized Athenian society itself. The poorest citizens, unable to afford hoplite armor or land qualifying them for infantry service, became essential as trireme rowers. Their indispensable contribution translated into political influence, reshaping the Athenian assembly and empowering previously marginalized classes. Sea power became the unexpected catalyst for democratic power. Yet this maritime dominance extracted a heavy price. Athens' excessive reliance on naval power and its increasingly oppressive treatment of supposed allies sowed seeds of resentment throughout the Aegean. During the Peloponnesian War, Sparta, traditionally a land-based power, constructed its own fleet financed by Persian gold, eventually crushing the Athenian navy at Aegospotami in 405 BCE with its wooden walls shattered. Athens faced starvation and inevitable surrender. Nevertheless, the legacy of Athenian naval innovation endured far beyond its defeat. It demonstrated how a city-state with limited territory could transform into an imperial force through mastery of the sea. It also revealed that ships served as political instruments as much as weapons of war, a lesson future powers would not forget. If Athens commanded the Aegean, Carthage reigned supreme across the western Mediterranean. Established by Phoenician colonists around 800 BCE in modern Tunisia, Carthage built its power not merely through conquest but through an intricate web of trade, maritime expertise, and unrivaled naval innovation. By the 4th century BCE, Carthage had evolved beyond a wealthy city into the nerve center of a vast maritime network stretching from Iberian shores to Sicilian harbors, from North African coastlines to Sardinian waters. Carthaginian power flowed directly from its magnificent fleet. While Athens perfected the trireme, Carthage elevated naval engineering to unprecedented heights. Its shipyards, particularly the magnificent circular harbor of Carthage itself, could construct and shelter hundreds of warships simultaneously. These weren't theoretical capacities. Developed assembly line dock systems, enabling rapid construction and repair, an innovation centuries ahead of its time. Carthaginian vessels, frequently quadriremes or quinquiremes, outweighed Athenian triremes, designed not merely for speed but for overwhelming power. Their naval doctrine emphasized both ramming and boarding tactics. Supported by experienced mercenary marines and Libyo-Phoenician sailors raised from childhood to interpret the sea's countless moods, Carthage's maritime supremacy extended beyond military dominance into commercial mastery. Carthaginian merchants navigated treacherous Atlantic coastlines of Europe and Africa, traded precious tin and silver, and returned with exotic treasures from distant shores. The navy ensured that neither pirates, rival merchants, nor Roman ambitions disrupted this lucrative commercial network. Then came the watershed moment, the Punic Wars. Rome, ascending in the Italian peninsula, recognized that defeating Carthage required creating a navy from nothing. When fortune delivered a stranded Carthaginian quinquireme, Roman engineers reverse-engineered it, adding the innovative Corvissa boarding bridge that neutralized Carthage's superior seamanship by transforming naval engagements into infantry battles fought on wooden platforms. Despite early setbacks, Carthage defended its maritime reputation through brilliant commanders and tactical mastery. During the First Punic War, Carthaginian fleets fought scores of major naval engagements. At Drepana, they executed a flawless maneuver that annihilated a numerically superior Roman fleet, demonstrating that Carthage still commanded the sea with unmatched skill. Yet quantity eventually overcame quality. Roman persistence, superior logistics, and ruthless discipline gradually turned the tide. By the conclusion of the Second Punic War, Carthage's once mighty fleet had vanished, its legendary shipyards dismantled, its maritime power broken forever. Yet the legend of Carthaginian naval excellence endures across millennia. They represented far more than warriors upon water. They were master merchants, innovative shipwrights, and fearless navigators who once dominated the seas through intellect, wealth, and the masterful transformation of wood into maritime power. When we envision ancient Egypt, our minds conjure pyramids reaching toward heaven, pharaohs in golden regalia, and monumental temples. Rarely do we picture fleets. Yet Egypt ranks among the earliest civilizations to harness naval power, both upon the life-giving Nile and the vast Mediterranean. Though Egyptian vessels may lack the fame of Greek triremes or Carthaginian queen-quiremes, for thousands of years Egypt relied on watercraft to maintain imperial control, transport armies, and safeguard the economic lifelines that sustained its civilization. The Nile served as Egypt's true highway and artery, connecting north and south, desert and fertile delta. As early as 3000 BCE, Egyptian shipwrights crafted vessels from bundled papyrus reeds and later cedarwood imported from distant Lebanon. These rivercraft transported grain that fed millions, gold that adorned temples, soldiers that enforced pharaonic will, and even colossal stone monuments that still inspire awe today. Pharaohs led naval expeditions southward into Nubia, seeking gold and slaves, and eastward across the Red Sea to the mysterious land of Punt, a realm rich in fragrant incense, precious ivory, and exotic creatures unknown to Egyptian eyes. Yet Egypt's naval ambitions extended beyond riverine dominance. By the New Kingdom era, 1552–1070 BCE, Egypt developed formidable sea-going fleets capable of challenging pirates, repelling seaborne invasions, and projecting pharaonic power beyond natural borders. Under visionary rulers like Thutmose III and Ramesses III, Egypt deployed warships against the mysterious sea. Pipasa, confederation of maritime raiders, threatening the eastern Mediterranean's stability. These epic confrontations, immortalized in vivid relief carvings at Medinet Habu, depict Egyptian archers loosing deadly volleys from ship decks, while Marines engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat across narrow wooden platforms. Unlike Greek triremes with their multiple or banks, Egyptian seagoing vessels were broader, primarily sail-driven craft with limited maneuverability. They frequently featured elevated fighting platforms and carried specialized crews of archers, spearmen, and sailors trained in both naval combat and navigation. Their primary advantage lay in mobility along coastlines and rivers, where they could rapidly deploy soldiers or intercept merchant traffic with devastating efficiency. Egyptian naval strength underpinned its economy as thoroughly as its famous agriculture. Grain exports to the Levant and trade with Aegean powers received protection from escort vessels. Ports like Byblus and Tanis evolved into thriving centers of both commerce and naval logistics. Even foreign rulers sought Egyptian shipbuilders, recognizing their unmatched craftsmanship. Eventually, Egypt's naval power diminished beneath successive waves of foreign domination: Libyans, Assyrians, Persians, and ultimately Greeks and Romans. Yet its enduring legacy of riverine and coastal warfare established foundations for naval traditions throughout the ancient Near East. Egypt's vessels may not have commanded the open sea with the authority of later powers, but they mastered the rhythm of empire, sailing wherever the Nile flowed, wherever favorable winds allowed, and wherever pharaonic ambition demanded. When the Roman Republic first emerged as a significant power, it possessed no naval tradition worth mentioning. Roman strength resided in disciplined legions and remarkable road-building capacity, not maritime expertise. Yet this changed dramatically and swiftly when the Republic found itself locked in existential struggle against Carthage for Mediterranean supremacy. The The cultural cross-pollination between distant civilizations flourished wherever strong fleets anchored. Cities like Alexandria evolved into cosmopolitan centers where wealth accumulated and ideas circulated freely. Where naval power established itself, markets thrived, artists created, scholars debated, and revolutionary concepts spread like ripples across water. The psychological impact of ancient naval warfare penetrated deeply into societal consciousness. Fire ships cutting through darkness, ramming tactics that shattered vessels in moments, and desperate boarding actions left indelible impressions on how warfare itself was conceptualized. Naval conflict introduced the revolutionary concept that the sea itself could function as a weapon, that mobility and control, rather than mere destructive force, often determined victory. Today we often remember these ancient powers primarily for their territorial conquests. Yet their maritime achievements proved equally vital and frequently more enduring. Ancient naval warfare transcended questions of vessel speed or ram design. It revealed which civilizations truly understood the sea as a stage, not merely for conflict, but for the unfolding drama of history itself. Though the triremes have long since vanished, their wake continues to influence our world in ways both subtle and profound. Cyrus the Great entered the world around 600 BCE in the region of Anshan, a vassal kingdom beneath Median dominance. His family, the Achaemenids, claimed illustrious lineage and governed a modest but respected Persian domain. Nothing in Cyrus's earliest days suggested he would forge one of history's most expansive empires, uniting lands from the Mediterranean to the Indus. Yet, from his very beginning, legend enveloped him like a royal cloak. The Greek historian Herodotus presents one of antiquity's most dramatic origin narratives. According to his account, King Astyages of Media, Cyrus's maternal grandfather, experienced a troubling dream suggesting his daughter's son would overthrow him. Court interpreters confirmed his darkest fears. This unborn child would threaten his throne. Seeking to neutralize this prophesied danger, Astyages arranged his daughter Mandane's marriage to Cambyses I, a Persian noble of good standing but limited political significance, hoping any offspring would remain far from power's center. Yet the prophetic dreams persisted, haunting the king's sleep. When Cyrus entered the world, Astyages abandoned caution for decisive action. He summoned his trusted courtier, Harpagus, and commanded him to eliminate the infant. Harpagus, reluctant to stain his hands with royal blood, delegated this grim task to a humble shepherd. Yet fate intervened instead of abandoning the child to the elements. The shepherd raised Cyrus as his own son, concealing him among mountain pastures and raising him as an ordinary herder's child, far from palace intrigues and royal expectations. As Cyrus matured, his natural charisma blossomed like a desert flower after rain. Even as a youth, he distinguished himself among peers, commanding other children with natural authority and displaying leadership qualities far beyond his years. Eventually, whispers reached the royal court tales of a noble child living the humble existence of a shepherd. Astyages investigated these rumors, and gradually the extraordinary truth unraveled before him. Remarkably, the king spared his grandson's life, perhaps no longer perceiving him as a threat, or perhaps haunted by a grandfather's natural affection and lingering guilt. Harpagus, however, suffered a fate most grim. In an act of horrific vengeance, Astyages slaughtered Harpagus's innocent son. Then, in a banquet that would echo through the centuries, served the flesh to the unsuspecting father as a feast. Only after Harpagus had eaten did the king reveal the ghastly truth, displaying the child's head and hands as proof of his monstrous retribution. Meanwhile, Cyrus journeyed back to Persia to dwell under his father Cambyses' protection, now openly acknowledged as royal blood. What the Median king failed to comprehend was that his own actions had sown the seeds of his inevitable downfall. Cyrus's extraordinary journey from royal cradle to shepherd's hut and back to princely halls gifted him with an unparalleled understanding of humanity in all its forms. He could speak to noble and commoner alike with authentic understanding, having lived both realities. Whether Herodotus's account stands as historical truth or poetic embellishment, it perfectly captures the mystique surrounding Cyrus, a man who cheated death as an infant only to rise like a phoenix toward his destiny. These early trials forged not merely a survivor, but a visionary who would redefine the very concept of kingship. As the shadows lengthened across the mid-6th century BCE, Cyrus had transformed from mere Persian prince into a calculating strategist with eyes fixed on empire. The Median overlordship, though still formidable under King Astyages, had begun to waver. Like a master chess player, Cyrus sensed the shifting balance of power and prepared his decisive move, the spark that would ignite this powder keg, a burning desire for vengeance. According to both Herodotus and Babylonian records, General Harpagasta, the memory of his murdered son served to him at that abominable feast, had hardened into resolve. Now positioned at the heart of Median military power, Harpagus reached out to Cyrus through secret channels, offering not just support but the keys to an empire. His clandestine messages carried promises of internal betrayal that would tear the Median kingdom apart from within. Thus began a conspiracy destined to reshape the ancient world's political landscape. In 553 BCE, Cyrus unfurled the banner of rebellion. Persia, long a subordinate kingdom, declared its independence with thunder and steel. What followed was not a single glorious battlefield confrontation, but a methodical, 3-year campaign of territorial acquisition and political maneuvering. Cyrus's forces advanced like an inexorable tide through Median lands, gathering strength as disaffected nobles and neighboring peoples flocked to his cause. Yet what truly distinguished the Persian prince was not merely his tactical brilliance, but his revolutionary approach to conquest, where enemies who surrendered found mercy rather than the sword. This combination of military prowess and calculated clemency earned him a reputation that inspired both terror and devotion. Within Astyages' court, loyalty unraveled like a poorly woven tapestry. When the decisive confrontation finally erupted around 550 BCE, the outcome shocked observers throughout the Near East. The mighty Median army, betrayed from within, collapsed before Cyrus's forces. Astyages, the king who had once ordered his grandson's death, now found himself abandoned by his own warriors. The Median Empire, which had dominated the Iranian plateau for generations, crumbled in a matter of days. When Cyrus strode through the gates of Ecbatana, the Median capital, he arrived not as a savage conqueror, but as a revolutionary statesman. Instead of raising temples and palaces, he honored local customs. Rather than dismantling Median government, he preserved its effective structures and incorporated Median officials into his administration. This enlightened policy of cultural respect and political inclusion would become the cornerstone of Persian imperial governance for centuries to come. With Media now firmly under his control, Cyrus had accomplished more than merely unifying the Iranian plateau. He had inherited an empire and its expansive networks of influence. His dominion now stretched from the mountains of modern-day Iran to the distant steppes of Central Asia. Yet, for a man of Cyrus's vision, this vast territory represented not an endpoint, but a foundation from which to launch even greater ambitions. Flushed with his triumph over the Medes, Cyrus the Great cast his penetrating gaze westward, where the fabulously wealthy kingdom of Lydia beckoned. Its ruler, Croesus, was no ordinary monarch, but a living legend whose immense riches had transformed his very name into a synonym for unimaginable wealth. His capital at Sardis dazzled visitors with opulence, its streets and palaces gleaming with gold. Croesus commanded formidable military forces, including elite cavalry units and battle-hardened infantry that had subjugated much of western Anatolia. But even this magnificent kingdom would soon discover that against Cyrus's rising star, wealth alone provided little protection. Croesus, however, made a catastrophic misjudgment. He failed to grasp Cyrus's true capabilities in an attempt to thwart Persian expansion before it reached his borders. The Lydian king formed powerful alliances with Egypt and Babylon and sought divine guidance from the Oracle of Delphi. The oracle's enigmatic prophecy that if you cross the river, a great empire will fall filled Croesus with confidence. Emboldened by this seemingly favorable prediction, he launched his invasion, only to discover the cruel irony: the empire destined for destruction was his own. He disbanded portions of his mercenary forces, planning to regroup with allied reinforcements when spring arrived. But Cyrus shattered military convention. He pursued relentlessly through the harsh winter landscape, a bold and unprecedented strategy that caught the Lydians completely unprepared. Within weeks, Sardis found itself under siege, with Croesus trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. Herodotus recounts that Cyrus employed brilliant psychological warfare during the final assault. Knowing the legendary Lydian cavalry was Croesus's greatest strength, he positioned camels at the front of his battle lines. The unfamiliar scent terrified the Lydian horses, rendering their elite mounted forces useless. The capital fell swiftly, and Croesus himself was captured amid the chaos. What followed would become one of history's most compelling tales of mercy. Rather than executing Croesus, as was expected of conquerors, Cyrus reportedly spared him, elevating him to the position of trusted advisor. According to the dramatic account, as Croesus awaited execution on a funeral pyre, he called out the name of Solon, the Athenian philosopher, who had once warned him that no man should be considered fortunate until the end of his life was known. When Cyrus learned of this wisdom, he was so moved that he ordered the flames extinguished, recognizing the profound truth in this lesson about the fickleness of fortune. Whether historical fact or poetic embellishment, this narrative perfectly encapsulates Cyrus's revolutionary approach to conquest: clemency over cruelty, wisdom over vengeance. With Lydia's fall, Cyrus acquired not just its legendary treasuries of gold, but also its extensive trade networks and influence over the wealthy Greek city-states along the Ionian coast. Though these cities initially resisted Persian authority, they could not withstand the combined diplomatic and military pressure Cyrus exerted. This westward expansion marked a crucial strategic victory, establishing the first significant Persian presence in the Greek world, a development that would shape East-West relations for centuries to come. For Cyrus, however, it was merely another calculated step in his grand imperial vision. By the late 540s BCE, only one major power stood between Cyrus and complete dominance of the Near East: Babylon, the ancient marvel of Mesopotamia. Once ruled by legendary kings like Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon had evolved into a metropolis of unparalleled splendor, renowned for its towering ziggurats, massive double walls that seemed impregnable, and the lush hanging gardens that captivated visitors. Yet beneath this dazzling exterior, the empire was fracturing from within. King Nabonidus had proven himself increasingly unpopular, alienating the powerful priesthood of Marduk through controversial religious reforms. Having spent years away from the capital in self-imposed exile, he had delegated authority to his son Belshazzar, the same figure whose feast is dramatically portrayed in biblical accounts. As internal tensions mounted, Cyrus, with his keen political instincts, recognized the perfect moment to strike. In 539 BCE, Cyrus launched what would become a masterclass in political warfare. Unlike previous campaigns defined by siege and bloodshed, his approach to Babylon was surgical and sophisticated. After defeating Babylonian forces at Apis on the Tigris River, Cyrus unleashed a brilliant propaganda campaign alongside his military advance. The Persians portrayed themselves not as conquerors but as liberators, with Cyrus cast as the divinely appointed restorer of proper religious observance and justice. Perhaps most remarkably, when Cyrus finally reached Babylon itself, one of the most heavily fortified cities in the ancient world, he entered without resistance. According to both the Nabonidus Chronicle and Greek historical accounts, the city gates swung open to welcome him, whether through political calculation, religious conviction, or internal betrayal. In a gesture laden with symbolic significance, Cyrus entered the city as its savior rather than its subjugator. He paid homage at the temples, participated in sacred ceremonies, and declared himself chosen by Marduk to restore divine order. This philosophy of respectful conquest was enshrined in the famous Cyrus cylinder, a clay barrel inscribed with Cyrus's proclamations, often characterized as the world's first charter of human rights. This remarkable artifact outlined Cyrus's policies of religious tolerance, cultural respect, and repatriation of displaced peoples. Among the most significant beneficiaries were the Jewish exiles, forcibly relocated from Jerusalem decades earlier by Babylonian monarchs. Cyrus not only permitted their return to their ancestral homeland, but authorized the rebuilding of their sacred temple, an act of such profound significance that the Hebrew Bible bestows upon him the extraordinary title of God's anointed, a designation previously reserved exclusively for Israelite kings. Upon claiming Babylon in 539 BCE, Cyrus didn't simply add another conquest to his growing empire. He fundamentally reimagined what empire could mean. The Cyrus cylinder stands as the most tangible evidence of this revolutionary vision. Inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform script, this modest clay artifact bears an extraordinary message about the nature of power. While modern scholars debate whether it truly constitutes the world's first human rights declaration, the cylinder undeniably presents a radical conception of rulership focused on stewardship rather than exploitation. Within this text, Cyrus presents himself as divinely selected by Babylon's patron deity Marduk to restore justice and order following Nabonidus's misrule. Yet, this wasn't mere political posturing. Cyrus implemented these principles through concrete actions. He restored neglected temples to their proper function, allowed displaced communities to return to their ancestral lands, and explicitly committed to preserving local traditions rather than imposing Persian customs. The liberation of the Jewish people from their Babylonian exile stands as perhaps the most celebrated outcome of this policy. After generations in captivity, they were permitted to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their destroyed temple, an act memorialized in the Book of Ezra, which presents Cyrus as an instrument of divine will. Indeed, Cyrus holds the unique distinction of being the only non-Jewish figure in the Hebrew Bible honored with the title Messiah, or Anointed One. The language of the Cyrus cylinder emphasizes themes of freedom, restoration, and legitimacy through justice's stark departure from the conventional rhetoric of ancient monarchs who typically glorified conquest and divine retribution. Rather than boasting of cities razed or enemies enslaved, Cyrus emphasizes his role as protector and preserver of diverse cultural and religious traditions. This wasn't humanitarian idealism, but shrewd statecraft. By respecting local institutions, Cyrus cultivated loyalty that military force alone could never secure. While we must avoid projecting contemporary values onto ancient documents, the Cyrus cylinder's vision remains genuinely revolutionary for its time. It presents a world where legitimate authority stems not from terror, but from benevolence and inclusivity. Today, this legacy endures. A replica of the cylinder stands on display at United Nations headquarters, acknowledging its symbolic importance as an early blueprint for pluralistic governance. Cyrus the Great accomplished something far more challenging than merely conquering a vast empire. He created a sustainable system to govern it. This was no small feat. His dominion encompassed an extraordinary diversity of peoples: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Elamites, Lydians, Hebrews, and countless others, each with distinct languages, religious traditions, social customs, and historical grievances. What elevated Cyrus from conqueror to truly visionary ruler was not the territorial expanse he controlled, but the innovative framework he developed to manage this unprecedented diversity. At the heart of Cyrus's governance philosophy was a revolutionary concept: tolerance through structured autonomy. Unlike most ancient rulers who imposed their cultural and religious practices upon subjected peoples, Cyrus pioneered a decentralized administrative model. Local leadership remained intact, religious practices continued unhindered, and cultural traditions were preserved. Rather than demanding submission through intimidation, Cyrus sought to earn genuine allegiance's strategy that proved remarkably effective. He brilliantly synthesized existing administrative systems, adopting effective elements from Median and Babylonian governance while integrating Persian innovations to create a uniquely adaptable imperial structure. Authority was distributed through satraps, provincial governors, who oversaw taxation, security, and justice within their territories. These officials were typically selected from local aristocracy, but remained directly accountable to central Persian authority, creating a balanced system that became the administrative foundation for generations of Achaemenid rule. Cyrus also recognized that prosperity required more than military control. He invested substantially in infrastructure, securing trade routes, protecting merchant caravans, and ensuring fair commercial practices throughout his domains. His empire functioned not merely as a military entity, but as an interconnected economic and cultural network spanning from the Indus Valley to the Aegean coastline. Perhaps most ingeniously, Cyrus understood the profound power of symbolic gestures. In each conquered city, he made deliberate demonstrations of respect, restoring damaged temples, participating in local religious ceremonies, and preserving indigenous institutions. These weren't superficial performances, but calculated diplomatic strategies that transformed former adversaries into loyal subjects. Most remarkable was the relative absence of rebellion under his rule. Cyrus didn't merely prevent uprising, he inspired genuine admiration. Even the Greeks, typically contemptuous toward barbarian peoples, regarded him as a model of wise and just leadership. The Athenian historian Xenophon would later compose Cyropaedia, a partially fictionalized but deeply admiring biography, presenting Cyrus as the paradigm of enlightened rulership. By the twilight of his reign, Cyrus the Great had fundamentally transformed the political landscape of the ancient world, his influence stretching from the Mediterranean shores to the mountains of Central Asia. His empire extended farther than any previous realm in recorded history. Yet, like many visionary leaders throughout time, his boundless ambition eventually led him toward one final, fateful campaign, this time into the harsh steppes of the northeast, against a foe unlike any he had previously encountered. This expedition would mark his final chapter. Around 530 BCE, Cyrus mobilized his forces against the Massagetae, a confederation of fierce nomadic tribes dwelling beyond the Caspian Sea. These skilled mounted warriors were led by the formidable Queen Tamiris, a ruler remembered as both military strategist and symbol of indomitable resistance to the Persian imperial worldview. These nomadic peoples represented not just a potential threat to expanding borders, but an unpredictable force existing beyond the boundaries of civilized order. The campaign's details have reached us primarily through Herodotus's account, likely embellished for dramatic effect, yet containing kernels of historical truth. According to the Greek historian, Cyrus initially attempted diplomatic maneuvering, proposing marriage to Queen Tamarissa, transparent political calculation that she immediately recognized and rejected. When diplomacy failed, Cyrus resorted to deception. He reportedly abandoned a lavish feast of wine and delicacies within Massagetae territory, knowing these nomadic peoples had little experience with alcohol. After the unsuspecting warriors indulged and became intoxicated, Persian forces launched a devastating surprise attack, capturing many warriors, including Tamaris's own son. Consumed by grief and righteous fury, Tamiris vowed merciless retribution. In the decisive confrontation that followed, her forces overwhelmed the Persian army in a stunning reversal of fortune. Cyrus himself fell in battle, far from the magnificent cities he had conquered. Herodotus recounts the particularly gruesome aftermath. Tamaris allegedly had Cyrus's corpse decapitated and submerged his severed head in a skin filled with human blood, proclaiming, "Drink your fill of blood, you who thirsted for it." While this macabre conclusion may represent poetic license rather than historical fact, what remains certain is that Cyrus perished during this campaign in distant lands. His remains were eventually transported to Pasargadae, the Persian capital he had established, and interred in a simple yet dignified tomb that still stands today as testament to his enduring legacy. His death marked the conclusion of an extraordinary era. The imperial mantle passed to his son Cambyses II, who would continue the empire's expansion, most notably into Egypt. Yet, Cyrus's singular combination of military brilliance, administrative innovation, religious tolerance, and visionary leadership would prove impossible to fully replicate, even by his most capable successors. When Cyrus the Great drew his final breath, he bequeathed more than just a sprawling empire. He left behind a revolutionary political philosophy, a governance blueprint, and a legacy so profound that even centuries later, his name evoked universal reverence. The Achaemenid Empire he established stood as the most extensive political entity the world had witnessed until that time, spanning from the Aegean shores to the Indus River Valley. Yet its true significance lay not in its geographical expanse, but in its revolutionary administrative structure. The policies of cultural inclusion, religious tolerance, and administrative innovation that defined Cyrus's rule continued under his successors. His son, Cambyses II, and later the brilliant administrator, Darius the Great, didn't merely extend the empire's boundaries, they formalized and refined its institutional framework. The provincial system Cyrus pioneered evolved into the sophisticated satrapy network that became the hallmark of Persian governance. These regional administrators maintained order, collected revenues, and reported directly to the king, allowing this vast empire to function with remarkable efficiency despite its unprecedented size and diversity. Religious and cultural autonomy remained cornerstone imperial policy. Sacred sites, from Babylonian ziggurats to Egyptian temples, received protection and patronage across the empire. Local elites typically retained their positions under Persian oversight, and rebellions proved remarkably rare during the early Achaemenid period, not because populations were subjugated through fear, but because many communities genuinely preferred Persian governance to previous, more oppressive regimes. Cyrus also transformed the very conception of kingship, elevating it from mere political authority to moral stewardship. He claimed not simply the title of Persian king, but adopted expansive designations like King of the Four Corners of the world. Unlike the boastful tyrants who preceded him, however, Cyrus's legitimacy derived from his commitment to his subjects' welfare. This wasn't mere propaganda, but reflected a genuine paradigm shift in imperial philosophy. True greatness manifested through just governance, not merely military dominance. Even in death, Cyrus's influence remained palpable. His tomb at Pasargadae, surprisingly modest limestone structure, stood as a powerful symbol of humility and permanence. Alexander the Great himself, who conquered the Persian Empire 2 centuries later, reportedly visited this sacred site and ordered its restoration after discovering it had been desecrated. In Persia itself, Cyrus transcended historical memory to become an object of reverence. Subsequent Persian dynasties invoked his legacy to legitimize their own authority. Zoroastrian religious authorities associated him with divine justice and cosmic order, while Iranian national identity continues to celebrate him as the foundational figure of their civilization. Cyrus the Great's legacy transcended both his mortal life and the eventual collapse of his empire. As centuries passed, his reputation blossomed across continents, faiths, and civilizations, elevating him from mere Persian monarch to universal paragon, whose wisdom resonates through the corridors of time. Within the sacred texts of Judaism, Cyrus emerges not as a foreign conqueror, but as a divinely ordained emancipator. The Book of Isaiah bestows upon him the extraordinary title, the Anointed of the Lord, an honor typically reserved exclusively for kings of Israel. His momentous decree permitting Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and reconstruct their sacred temple represents a pivotal milestone in Jewish history. To countless generations, he embodies the rare archetype of a righteous Gentile, a powerful sovereign who wielded his authority not to suppress faith, but to nurture it, not to destroy freedom, but to restore it. In Greece, despite the bitter enmity that later characterized Greek-Persian relations. Cyrus was venerated as the quintessential ruler. Xenophon, the Athenian scholar and Socratic disciple, crafted the Cyropaedia, a semi-fictionalized biography portraying Cyrus as the embodiment of enlightened leadership, sagacious, equitable, temperate, and valorous. Though not strictly historical in nature, this influential work profoundly shaped Hellenistic and Roman conceptions of governance and ethical leadership for generations to come. Within Islamic tradition, certain scholars have drawn parallels between Cyrus and the enigmatic Dhul-Qarnayn, the two-horned one, mentioned in the Qur'an, virtuous sovereign, who constructed a magnificent barrier to shield vulnerable populations from chaos and injustice. Though this identification remains contested among scholars, it nevertheless reflects the profound reverence Cyrus commands across the spectrum of Abrahamic faiths. Contemporary historians and statesmen have likewise drawn inspiration from Cyrus's example. In 1776, as America's Revolution unfolded, Thomas Jefferson reportedly kept the Cyropaedia at his bedside, a silent witness to the birth of a new republic. During the 20th century, Iran's final Shah evoked Cyrus's memory as a powerful symbol of national cohesion and progressive reform. Today, the remarkable Cyrus cylinder, often heralded as humanity's earliest declaration of human rights, stands proudly displayed at the United Nations, a timeless emblem of tolerance and enlightened governance. Cyrus's enduring fascination stems from something deeper than conquest. He is celebrated not merely for military triumphs or imperial expansion, but for his extraordinary capacity to exercise power with justice and compassion. He demonstrated that vast empires need not suppress cultural diversity to maintain cohesion, and that rulers could earn genuine loyalty through respect rather than fear. More than 25 centuries after his passing, Cyrus the Great remains a compelling paradox, a conqueror venerated for his humanity, a king celebrated by those he subjugated. Few historical figures have commanded such universal admiration across cultures and epochs, and fewer still have so thoroughly deserved it. In the scorching heat of the Nile Valley, ancient Egyptians made a striking aesthetic choice. Many deliberately shaved their heads completely. Yet this wasn't merely practical, it was symbolic, a declaration, a pristine surface. And upon this clean canvas, they displayed some of history's most elaborate and magnificent wigs. In ancient Egyptian society, wigs weren't frivolous accessories, but essential markers of identity, social position, and ritual purity. The elite didn't simply wear these headpieces, they showcased them as living art. Far from basic adornments, these masterpieces might be crafted from authentic human hair, imported horsehair, or meticulously woven plant fibers. Wealthy nobility commissioned multi-layered creations featuring intricate braiding patterns, golden beads, and even scented cones of perfumed wax positioned atop the wiglagarious fragrances that would gradually melt under the Egyptian sun, enveloping the wearer in an aromatic cloud of opulence. For Egyptian women, distinctive hairstyles symbolized femininity, fertility, and authority. A noblewoman's elaborate wig might feature delicate floral embellishments, vibrant colored bands, or clasps fashioned from precious metals. Priestesses often wore their ceremonial wigs, arranged in precise, symmetrical rows, a visual echo of the divine order they served. For men, particularly those in the pharaoh's service, a thick, stylized wig reflected not merely wealth and status, but proximity to divine authority. Children, however, displayed their unique social position through distinctive styles. Many wore the characteristic sidelock of youth, a shaved head adorned with a single ornate braid, symbolizing childhood innocence, that would later be ceremonially cut during rites of passage into adulthood. In stark contrast to the lavish court wigs stood the ritually bald priests. These religious officials were required to shave their entire bodies, including their heads, to maintain perfect ritual purity during sacred ceremonies, though even they might don ceremonial wigs during specific rites, symbolizing their spiritual office rather than personal identity. Perhaps most fascinating is how wigs continued to serve even in death. The departed were frequently entombed with elaborate hairpieces for their journey through the afterlife. While personal appearance held significance for both genders in Viking society, hair also carried profound legal implications. Viking legal codes treated hair violations with remarkable severity. Cutting someone's hair without consent constituted a grievous affront, one that might provoke vengeance, legal penalties, or even escalate into generations-spanning blood feuds. This stems from hair's fundamental connection to personal honor. To violate a warrior's locks was to assault their very social standing and identity. Viking mythology further elevated hair's symbolic importance. The Norse pantheon featured deities defined by their distinctive tresses: Thor, with his fiery crimson beard; Loki, whose shape-shifting powers often manifested through hair transformations; and most famously, the goddess Sif, whose legendary golden locks were so precious that when Loki severed them as mischief, he was compelled to beseech the dwarven smiths to forge magical replacements from pure gold. Hair transcended mortal vanity. It was divine currency, woven into the fabric of cosmic order. The Romans excelled at systems of control, and this mastery extended into the realm of personal appearance. In their highly stratified society, where politics, social class, and gender roles were rigorously regulated, hairstyles emerged as one of the most subtle yet powerful tools of social navigation, particularly among the elite. Your coiffure could literally proclaim your political allegiances, moral values, and personal ambitions. For Roman men of the early Republic, the ideal citizen presented himself as clean-cut, conservative, and practical. Hair was kept short, neat, and meticulously groomed. Any style approaching excessive length immediately aroused suspicion, suggesting effeminacy, foreign sympathies, or indolence. A cropped hairstyle and smooth-shaven face weren't merely aesthetic preferences, they were civic declarations. They announced to all, "I embody discipline. I am devoted to the state. I am quintessentially Roman." As the empire matured, Roman hairstyles flourished into theatrical displays of power. Emperors, like Nero and Commodus, abandoned restraint, cultivating luxuriant curls that deliberately evoked Greek philosophers or divine imagery. The distinctive Roman topknoten, artfully elevated section of hair at the front became fashionable, carefully crafted to project intelligence, vigor, or sophistication. These weren't casual styling choices. They were calculated political statements. Hair transformed into visual propaganda, conveying imperial messages without uttering a word. For Roman women, hairstyling evolved into architectural marvels. The renowned Flavian Tower, breathtaking, vertical construction of interwoven curls and braids, showcased extreme wealth and privilege. This elaborate creation wasn't merely fashion, it was an economic statement, impossible without an army of skilled slave attendants, specialized heated implements, and countless hours of painstaking labor. The more intricate a woman's coiffure, the more clearly it broadcast her elevated status, demonstrating she possessed both the leisure time and household staff to maintain such magnificence. Hair also functioned as a potent symbol of political allegiance. When an empress unveiled a new hairstyle on statues or coinage, aristocratic women throughout the empire swiftly adopted it. Mimicking imperial fashion wasn't merely flattery, it was a visible declaration of loyalty. Meanwhile, enslaved individuals were systematically denied this form of expression, typically forced to wear short, plain styles that reinforced their subjugation. Soldiers likewise adhered to practical, uniform cuts that emphasized collective identity over individual expression. Yet, Rome also had its hair rebels. Some citizens deliberately cultivated long locks or embraced barbarian styles as visual protests against imperial values. Gladiators occupying that unique space between celebrity and outcast often sported dramatic, distinctive hairstyles that enhanced their arena personas, crafting images that were simultaneously athletic, theatrical, and menacing. Far from a simple styling preference, this was a solemn cultural covenant. The chanmej originated from battlefield practicality. The shaved pate provided comfort beneath the kabuto helmet during combat. The top knot became an uncompromising symbol of warrior status, personal honor, and unwavering commitment to Bushido. To lose one's chanmej was to experience symbolic death. A disgraced samurai might be commanded to remove his top knot, or perform this act himself as acknowledgement of his unworthiness. In the most severe cases, the cutting of the chanmej directly preceded seppuku ritual suicide, performed to cleanse insurmountable shame. During the Heian period, 794–1185, aristocratic women cultivated astonishingly long tresses, often exceeding their own height, which cascaded unbound down their backs in a style called subarakashi. This wasn't merely an aesthetic preference, but a living embodiment of refinement, patience, and privileged status. Such extraordinary length required meticulous maintenance, abundant time, and considerable wealthy tributes exclusive to nobility, and embellishments, element conveying specific social information. Different arrangements precisely indicated a woman's marital status, age bracket, or professional standing. Courtesans and geishas employed particularly spectacular hairstyles, not simply to entice patrons, but to communicate their training level, professional stage, and experiential expertise. Throughout various shogunate administrations, strict regulations governed appropriate hairstyles by social class. Violating these aesthetic codes, seemingly minor variations in hair arrangement could trigger suspicion or formal punishment. Nevertheless, artists, actors, and masterless samurai ronin frequently tested these boundaries, using hair innovations to assert individual identity and quiet defiance against rigid social hierarchies. Hair was constrained both literally and metaphorically by obligation, devotion, and theatrical expression. Whether manifested in a samurai's austere dignity or a geisha's elaborate artistic creation, these hairstyles transcended fashion to become intricate narratives of honor, status, and profound cultural heritage. Throughout ancient Africa's diverse civilizations, hair functioned as a sophisticated communication system rather than mere personal adornment. Hairstyles operated as visual identity markers, spiritual expressions, and ingenious survival mechanisms. Long before colonial influences disrupted indigenous practices, African hair culture flourished as an intricate tapestry of symbolic meaning, artistic mastery, and quiet resistance against adversity. These meticulously crafted patterns weren't arbitrary. Each twist and coil revealed precise information about clan affiliations, age brackets, and social standing. Rivaled and sometimes surpassed the splendor of Egyptian pharaonic regalia. These weren't merely decorative, they were visual manifestations of sovereign power, broadcasting royal authority in a language universally understood throughout the kingdom. Their intricate creations weren't simply aesthetic achievements, but carefully coded social documents. Specific pattern arrangements were exclusively reserved, almost like visual patents for brides entering matrimony, warriors preparing for battle, or initiates undergoing spiritual transformation. These master craftspeople preserved ancestral techniques through generations, earning a status approaching that of spiritual intermediaries. To surrender your hair to their skilled hands was an act of profound trust. You weren't simply altering your appearance, you were temporarily entrusting them with your spiritual essence. Stone and rendered butterfat continues to be applied to elaborate braided creations even today. These distinctive ochre-coated styles serve dual purposes. They shield precious hair from the harsh desert elements while simultaneously functioning as sophisticated biographical markers. Motherhood to widowhood. For Himba women, their crowning glory literally metamorphoses with life's seasons, creating a visual autobiography that requires no written words. Among the remarkable Himba people of Namibia's arid landscapes, a striking red doker, paste meticulously prepared from pulverized stone and rendered butterfat, continues to be applied to elaborate braided creations even today. Motherhood to widowhood. For Himba women, their crowning glory literally metamorphoses with life's seasons, creating a visual autobiography that requires no written words. Throughout the brutal transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans transformed hairstyles into vehicles of silent resistance and cultural preservation. Cornrows transcended their aesthetic purpose to become cartographic tools, intricate patterns encoding escape routes, safe havens, or meeting locations. Some braiding sequences contained concealed messages, while others faithfully preserved ancestral styling techniques from homelands torn away. Each carefully maintained braid became an act of defiance against cultural erasure, quiet revolution, woven strand by strand. Across West Africa's diverse cultures, distinct hair practices marked life's most profound transitions. Ritual head shaving signaled periods of mourning or spiritual metamorphosis, while cultivated dreadlocks embodied spiritual potency, divine connection, or warrior status. Hair wasn't merely aesthetic, it was sacred, imbued with spiritual significance. Though European colonialism would later attempt to stigmatize these indigenous practices while imposing Eurocentric beauty standards, the ancient roots of African hair traditions proved impossible to completely sever. They persisted through generations, preserved in memory, transmitted through hands, passed from mother to daughter, and now experience powerful resurgence as symbols of cultural reclamation and pride worldwide. In ancient Greece, where marble sculptures and epic poetry shaped Western consciousness, hair transcended simple grooming to become a sophisticated performance of civic virtue, intellectual prowess, and civilized refinement. From the disciplined curls adorning Athenian youths to the flowing locks crowning renowned philosophers, hairstyles defined one's place in the complex social order. Your carefully cultivated coiffure immediately communicated who you were not merely to your fellow citizens, but to the watchful eyes of the gods themselves. Picture ancient Greece, where a man's locks spoke volumes before he uttered a word. In heroic ages, warriors like Achilles and Odysseus proudly displayed flowing manes, their lustrous hair captured in epic poetry as divine signatures of their exceptional status. These cascading locks, often secured with simple ribbons, embodied raw masculine power and nobility. Yet fashion, like empires, evolved. By the classical period, Athenian gentlemen had embraced a more restrained aesthetics, the well-trimmed, moderately short cut that whispered of civilization rather than shouted of battlefield glory. The beard, however, endured as intellectual currency. It adorned the contemplative faces of Athens' greatest minds, Socrates, with his untamed facial hair, Plato and Aristotle, with their more manicured approaches. This wasn't mere fashion, but visual philosophy. The dignified beard, paired with an exposed brow, created the perfect canvas for displaying rational thought. The message was unmistakable. Here stood a man of contemplation, not impulse, of reason, not passion. Meanwhile, those unfortunate enough to occupy society's margins, slaves and foreigners, often endured the humiliation of forced headshaving, their bare scalps broadcasting their subordinate status. Thus, the privilege of proper hair became democracy's silent boundary marker. For women, hair choreographed a complex dance between propriety and ritual. Respectable Athenian women appeared in public with their tresses disciplined into elaborate, upswept styles, often veiled their controlled coiffures, reflecting their presumed domestic restraint. To witness a woman with hair unbound was to glimpse something extraordinary, either the raw grief of mourning or the divine frenzy of Dionysian worship. In these rare moments of loosened locks, women temporarily stepped outside society's rigid framework, their flowing hair symbolizing either profound sorrow or ecstatic liberation. Girlhood itself was marked by distinctive hairstyles. Young females enjoyed the freedom of unfettered tresses until puberty's threshold approached. Then came a pivotal moment, the ceremonial cutting of her first braid, offered reverently to Artemis, goddess of wilderness and transitions. This single act, both sacrifice and celebration, visually announced her journey from childhood's freedom toward womanhood's responsibilities. Even Olympian deities expressed their divine nature through distinctive hairstyles. Athena, stern goddess of strategic warfare, appeared with her hair precisely arranged beneath her battle helmet, each strand as disciplined as the armies she favored. Meanwhile, Aphrodite's sensuous curls tumbled in calculated disarray, embodying desire's untamed power. Mortal Greeks, seeking divine favor, would sometimes adopt these celestial signatures, their hairstyles becoming prayers made visible, silent invocations of the qualities they sought from heaven. Across the ancient world in China, hair transcended mere appearance to become the physical embodiment of moral philosophy. Here, Confucian principles transformed every strand into a sacred trust, from the austere top-knots of scholarly elites to the architectural wonders crowning imperial ladies. Chinese hairstyles served as three-dimensional manifestations of cosmic order. Unlike the ever-changing Greek fashions, Chinese hair practices remained anchored in profound reverence for ancestors. Why this steadfastness? Because Confucian wisdom decreed your body hair included wasn't truly yours to alter. This living inheritance from your parents demanded preservation as an act of filial devotion. To cut one's hair frivolously wasn't merely a style choice, it constituted a moral transgression against family lineage. This philosophy transformed punishment into spiritual ceremony. When criminals faced head shaving, they endured not just physical alteration, but symbolic severance from ancestral protection. For respectable men, the proper appearance was non-negotiable. Hair grown long, gathered into a dignified topknot, often complemented by scholarly caps and flowing robes, a uniform of moral rectitude. The sight of a man with disheveled hair unleashed immediate alarm, signaling either profound mourning, mental disturbance, or dangerous rebellion against established order. Women's hairstyles mapped their life journey with exquisite precision. Unmarried girls displayed their availability through playful twin buns or side-swept arrangements, visual announcements of their transitional status. Marriage transformed not just their legal standing, but their very silhouette, as hair was restyled into mature configurations. Often a single, dignified coil, secured with jade pins or gold ornaments, whose value reflected family prosperity. The Tang dynasty elevated these practices to spectacular artistry. Court ladies balanced elaborate architectural creations that defied gravity, adorned with phoenix ornaments symbolizing imperial favor, fresh flowers declaring seasonal awareness, and silk accessories demonstrating textile wealth. Perhaps nowhere was hair more explicitly political than during dynastic transitions. When the Manchu conquerors established the Qing dynasty in the 17th century, they weaponized hairstyles as tools of subjugation. The cued that distinctive style, combining a shaved forehead with a long, braided pigtail, wasn't merely fashion, but forced allegiance made visible. This hairstyle, alien to Han Chinese traditions, became the ultimate loyalty test, with resistance punishable by death. The edict, "Keep your hair and lose your head," or "Keep your head and cut your hair," presented a devastating choice. Countless Han Chinese chose execution rather than adopt this follicular emblem of foreign domination, their final defiance written not in proclamations, but in the hair they refused to surrender. Meanwhile, Taoist monks embraced the razor's edge of spiritual transformation. These seekers shaved their heads, completely a radical act, symbolizing their total rejection of worldly attachments. Buddhist monks followed similar practices, their gleaming bare scalps, proclaiming their detachment from material concerns and their profound acceptance of life's impermanence. Their hairless heads became walking meditations, visual cones, challenging observers to consider what truly matters beyond physical appearance. In ancient India, hair transcended its biological function to become something almost mystical, a sacred medium where divine intentions and human society intertwined. Far more than decorative, Indian hair traditions formed an intricate language where ritual purity, caste identity, and spiritual symbolism converged. Every strand told a story of devotion or restriction. Every style a powerful declaration of one's place in both cosmic and social orders. From the wild, serpentine dreadlocks of wandering ascetics to the smooth, gleaming scalps of temple pilgrims, hair in Indian culture spoke volumes about belief, discipline, and transformation. Consider the remarkable sadhis, those dust-covered holy men who abandoned conventional existence to wander India's sacred landscapes. These mystics never permitted blade or comb to touch their hair. Instead, they allowed it to grow untamed until it matted into thick, rope-like dreadlocks called jata. These impressive formations weren't merely striking, they embodied spiritual potency and conscious rejection of worldly concerns. The more extraordinary the tangle, the more powerful the unspoken message. This being had transcended ordinary human preoccupations with appearance, family ties, and even individual identity. In their wild hair, Sadhis consciously emulated Lord Shiva himself, the great ascetic deity, whose own magnificent jata was said to capture and tame the mighty Ganges River as it descended from heaven to earth. Yet, paradoxically, for many other devotees, the complete absence of hair represented the pinnacle of sanctity. Throughout Hindu traditions, pilgrims approaching sacred sites would voluntarily submit to having their heads shaved clean, offering their hair as tangible symbols of ego surrender and spiritual purification. Children's first haircuts, mundane ceremonies, marked crucial developmental thresholds, believed to cleanse lingering karmic residue from previous incarnations. During periods of bereavement, male relatives demonstrated their grief through ritual head shaving, the absence of hair externally manifesting their internal humility and temporary withdrawal from life's ordinary pleasures. Hair also functioned as a sophisticated social signaling system, instantly communicating caste affiliation and marital status. Upper caste men maintained a distinctive single tuft of hair at the crown, known as shika, after meticulously shaving the remainder of their scalp. This carefully preserved topknot wasn't merely traditionally, visually proclaimed them as twice-born members of the priestly or scholarly classes obligated to perform sacred rituals. To cut this shika without proper cause was to commit social suicide, equivalent to renouncing one's entire hereditary identity and religious obligations. Women's hairstyles conveyed equally nuanced messages through their intricate arrangements. Unmarried maidens typically displayed their hair loosely or in simple braided patterns, while married women gathered their tresses into elaborate buns or coiled configurations that signaled their committed status. A meticulously oiled, perfectly braided style demonstrated not merely aesthetic sensibility, but deeper qualities of discipline, beauty, cultivation, and family honor. Ornamentation varied dramatically by regional tradition and household prosperity. Fragrant jasmine blossoms, gleaming gold hair clips, and intricately carved decorative combs adorned feminine crowns during festivals, weddings, and other auspicious occasions. Beyond its spiritual and social dimensions, hair also channeled erotic power in ancient Indian culture. Classical texts, like the Kama Sutra, devote entire sections to sensual hair arrangements designed to enhance romantic encounters. The magnificent temple sculptures at sites like Khajuraho immortalize women with hair flowing down their backs like liquid obsidian. These stone tresses somehow capturing both movement and sensuality across the centuries. Their carved locks beckon viewers into a world where physical beauty and spiritual transcendence mysteriously intertwine. Throughout antiquities, diverse civilizations, hairstyles functioned not merely as conformity markers, but as powerful vehicles for distinction, resistance, and rebellion. Across continents and cultures, the conscious alteration or rejection of dominant hair practices frequently constituted acts of defiance, whether subtle or flagrant, against prevailing cultural norms, imperial authorities, or systems of oppression. Hair became silent testimony, speaking volumes when voices were suppressed. In Judea, under Roman occupation, this follicular resistance took particularly poignant form. The Jewish people, governed by meticulous religious laws, deliberately avoided the elaborate grooming rituals favored by their Roman overlords. Many Jewish men steadfastly refused to shave their beards or style their hair according to Roman fashion sensibilities, instead preserving distinctive appearances deeply rooted in ancestral spiritual observances. For them, hair wasn't merely aesthetic choice. It was faith made visible within an empire obsessively focused on cultural assimilation. This seemingly simple grooming decision constituted a profound daily act of resistance against absorption into the dominant imperial culture. Meanwhile, in ancient Gaul, during Julius Caesar's brutal conquest campaigns, Celtic warriors transformed their hair into psychological weapons. Contemporary Roman writers describe with horror and fascination how these barbarians created startling appearances by washing their hair with lime solutions that produced stiff, brightly colored spikes arranged in mohawk-like formations. Roman observers interpreted these styles as evidence of primitive savagery. But for the Gauls themselves, such dramatic presentations served dual purposes: terrifying enemies on the battlefield, while simultaneously strengthening tribal bonds in resistance to Roman domination. Their hair became war paint, in follicular forma, visual battle cry against imperial encroachment. The Parthians, and later the Sassanids, those formidable imperial powers flourishing east of Rome, transformed their very appearances into declarations of sovereignty. Their monarchs cultivated magnificent cascades of intricately curled hair and wore luxuriant, carefully groomed beards that fell in glossy waves upon their royal garments. These were no mere fashion choices, but profound symbols of divine authority and ancestral pride. Through Roman eyes, such elaborate coiffures appeared strangely exotic, perhaps even effeminate, a misinterpretation that revealed more about Roman cultural blindness than Persian reality. For within the Persian cultural framework, these resplendent tresses represented the very essence of masculine power, royal legitimacy, and cosmic blessing. Their hair became an unspoken manifesto, proclaiming without words, "We are not you, nor shall we ever be." Even in societies where oppression ran deepest, hair emerged as an unexpected weapon of resistance. Enslaved populations across vast imperial territories, from ancient Greece to the Americas, frequently endured forced head shaving designed specifically to strip away cultural identity and individual dignity. Yet in these darkest circumstances, whenever opportunity permitted, they wielded hair as instruments of memory, lineage, and quiet rebellion. Complex braiding patterns concealed precious seeds for future planting. Strategically placed beads encoded meanings invisible to overseers, and certain arrangements subtly recreated maps, preserved mythological narratives, or transmitted secret messages between communities. Each twist and plait became an act of defiance, preserving what captors sought desperately to erase. Women, too, articulated powerful statements through their tresses. In martial Sparta, unmarried women famously cropped their hair short, a striking contrast to the flowing locks prized by other Greek women. This deliberate style signaled not just readiness for physical activity, but a profound expression of independence that challenged conventional feminine ideals. Within Rome's sophisticated urban landscape, certain women consciously rejected elaborate imperial court fashions, instead embracing simpler, more modest arrangements that aligned with philosophical movements like Stoicism or the emerging Christian faith. And in times of political upheaval, when emperors toppled from power, Their distinctive hairstyles fell alongside them, with citizens hastily altering their own appearance to distance themselves from fallen regimes. In such volatile moments, cutting away an imperial-style arrangement could constitute a dangerous yet unmistakable declaration of political allegiance or dissent. Across these diverse contexts, hair transcended its biological function to become something far more profound, not merely reflecting the existing world, but actively participating in efforts to reshape it. Throughout ancient civilizations, when voices faced silencing, or when swords gleamed in sunlight, the humble scalp transformed into an unexpectedly powerful canvas of resistance. A single braid, a deliberate buzz, an intentional curl, each could communicate volumes that spoken words never dared express, whispering defiance beneath the very gaze of power. As our medieval pharmacological journey comes to a close, gentle listeners, I hope these ancient tales of herbal experimentation have sufficiently lulled you toward the realm of dreams. The medieval mind-alterers we've explored tonight have long since been replaced by modern understanding, yet their stories remain, whispering to us across centuries like a soporific breeze. May your slumber be deep and restorative, free from the visions of mandrake or the disorienting effects of henbane. Unlike our medieval ancestors, may you drift peacefully into unconsciousness without the aid of dubious ointments or mysterious brews. Should you find yourself still awake, remember that sometimes the most potent sleep aid is simply the droning voice of a history enthusiast describing antiquated. Until our next historical lullaby, dear listeners, I bid you the sweetest of dreams. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and perhaps in your dreams, raise a goblet of spiced wine, minus the belladonna, to those curious souls of centuries past who dared to steep that unusual route in their evening brew. Good night.